So what we're going to do first this evening is we're going to look at the new invention called the heart tuner. So what you're about to see is a new version of an invention that I've been working on for many years. It used to be called the Heart Link. Information about this is available, and it is commercially available. The info is at heartcoherence.com. So what we're looking at is the output display of a device that will take the harmonic analysis and measure the coherence in a new way for two people's hearts, or brain waves, or your favorite plant or tree, or electrosmog. It's quite a powerful little gizmo. It sells for roughly about $1,000 US. It's a simple battery-powered, opto-isolated, UL-approved, fancy little two-channel programmable preamplifier that dumps via your USB or serial port into the PC. The radically new part of this invention is the measurement of coherence, as coherence has never been measured before. And as we'll see in the implosion PowerPoint that we're going to display just after this, that the ability to cohere the vacuum, the ability to make coherence, to suck the vacuum into you, is how you make matter out of light. Speaking of light. So how to cohere and see, coherence. Coherence is the difference between a flashlight and a laser. So we're teaching little children how to let their hearts shine. Turn on your heart lights wherever you go. Come on, baby, light my fire, and all that stuff. So this is about how you light your inner fire. Wasn't that the logo of this year's Olympics? Do you remember? Light your own fire? Well, that's the theme of this evening, is what is the electrical geometry of inner fire, and how do you light your own inner fire yourself? So let me just review what we're seeing on the screen. We have two wonderful volunteers who have offered to share their hearts with us. So nice of you. No secrets, right? No secrets. So we have Zen in red on the screen, and we have Julia in black. Yeah? And, oh, Julia likes that. She said her name. She was right there. That was very cool. Okay. So I always manage to pick the most wonderful people, it seems. You can always tell. Golden mean ratio, very pretty. So let me just describe what we're seeing here. We're seeing the raw ECG or EKG, the electrocardiogram. We measure it very simply. It's so easy. You just slide these little wrist electrodes under your wrist here. It's very simple, so there's no stickiness. It's just a very simple procedure. You see, when Zen moved his wrist, we got a little bit of noise there, see? And the auto scaling will now take just a minute to take that out of there. So we display the raw data, heart waves, brain waves, plant waves, tree waves, electrosmog waves, whatever we want. And then we display the conventional power spectra harmonic analysis. So this is the same way, for example, you do a waterfall harmonic analysis of your brain waves. And we're doing it in the same radio station, alpha, theta, delta, in which brain waves are usually analyzed. So this is very conventional here. It's just state of the art for display. What's new and interesting is over here. So in the conventional display here, we display the harmonics present in the heart from 0 to 20 cycles per second. We can actually take that and we can display that in logarithmic display or full screen display. If I hit linear versus log there, I can display the high frequency content of the heart, or I can pan and zoom, or I take just a portion of that display. And I can also double click to see the full screen so that I could look, for example, as in Signature Soundworks and Bioacoustic habitat theory, where I look for what is the missing harmonic here in red for Zen, missing harmonic right here around 6 cycles per second. Frequently, that indicates excess exposure to 50 or 60 cycles noise, so your heart can't make that. That was a big peak there from Julia. So you get the idea that in this, there she is. Look at that heart. Julia's got a wonderful heart. Nice lady, I tell you. Nice lady. Okay. Now, so that was this display. We're looking at the harmonic analysis. Notice the coherence peak went up when she did that. Here, yes? So what we're doing here, for anyone who has any mathematical interest, is I take the power spectra, which is a form of the fast Fourier transform, harmonic analysis, and I do a second order FFT, a second-order power spectra. And if you're not interested in math, don't worry about it. But if you are, the rigor and elegance here is that this is a new way of measuring internal or autocoherence. Because previously, in physics, we could only talk about a coherence when you compared one signal with another. With my new mathematics here, which I've pioneered, I can measure the internal coherence with only one signal. It's called autocoherence. And that enables me to do things like tell when your DNA is losing its soul because of your local genetic engineer. Believe it or not, it has to do with the fact that the coherence of any oscillator is a measure of its ability to self-organize and have a field effect that's sustainable. So the fact that your local genetic engineer does not understand that the field effect in your DNA is whether your kids are immortal, I mean have a soul, is now measurable by coherence analysis. So this is a very powerful, radical, new way to measure coherence. So how do we explain this to the little kids in the 3rd grade in Los Angeles inner city schools, as we did recently? Well, the amplitude of this first or primary peak of the second-order power spectra, which we call a coherence measure, the amplitude is the measure of coherence. So that when that peak goes up, your heart says yes, just like Julia just did. Okay? And so in effect, what we're finding is that that is a lie detector, believe it or not. It replaces kinesiology in the sense that it makes kinesiology measurable. Because indeed, we've done this at kinesiology colleges now. When this peak goes up, it's a biological yes from your body. And the physics is very simple. When your heart coheres, in effect, it has found a shareable wave. So literally, your heart doesn't become coherent unless it's found a wave that's distributable. So when this peak goes up, it's literally a measure of pure intent. And in fact, the heart doesn't lie. You can absolutely tell when the body says yes or no. You can also use this to have a conversation with someone who may be paraplegic and can't move anything. You whisper in their ear. When the peak goes up, it's a yes. When it's down, it's a no. It's quite beautiful. So that's the first thing we teach with this device is simple. Raise the peak. As you do, you become coherent. So when the teacher says, "Little Johnny, you go to the corner until you're coherent." Yes? Well, then the teacher looks over here and says, "Oh, Julia, you're coherent now. You can come back to class." Do you see? So coherent emotion is measurable and teachable. When your Sufi dance teacher says, "Hold the feeling like you would a little child," in effect, now you know exactly what it is to hold a feeling. When you look at someone you love, that peak goes up. So again, first thing we teach is simply the ability to be coherent. The second thing we teach with this device is that the position of this peak up and down the scale, the position is a measure of the musical key signature of your heart. So in effect, as this peak goes up and down, we measure the key signature of your bliss music. And as you'll see in a minute when we play the biofeedback game, we can play back in almost real time the musical key signature of your heart, and you hear your heart music. It's kind of fun. So the second thing we learn is the ability to move this up and down the scale, which is a measure of something called heart rate variability, which we'll talk about in a minute. So first thing is become coherent. Second thing is become emotionally flexible. The third thing we measure is empathy. When two peaks line up, which they've been doing very well here earlier. Very nice, guys. See, there we are. Yeah, okay, hello, hello. When the two peaks line up, what happens is their bodies have electrically coupled. So it's the physics of Tantra. It's the solution to marriage counseling in a certain way. It is a measurement of empathy. A scientist would call it impedance matching or resonance entrainment. But in effect, when two people's hearts enter the same key signature, which is a heart link, what happens is the capacitive information can move between bodies. And that is the physics of Tantra, quite literally. So the third thing we teach with this device is the ability to choose empathy by seeing who can find the other person's heart. I'm going to do a little bit of an adjust now here, since Zen's voltage coming from his heart is just a little bit lower than Julia, whose heart is singing so much. So I'm going to crank up the gain on the red channel a little bit, give Zen a better shot in the horse race here. There we go. Here we come. Okay, there it comes. Okay. Yeah. Now, those three things which I've just described to you, measured by this device, the heart tuner. There's Zen. Beautiful place, too. Those things I've described, the ability to learn coherent emotion, the ability to learn range of emotion, the flexibility to change emotion, to not be stuck in one place, and the ability to link up with another heart, or many people's hearts, called empathy. Those three things are objectively measured by this device. In other words, that's objective, hard science, hard physics. There's nothing subjective or arguable about those measurements. We've measured coherence, we've measured change of key signature, and we've measured entrainment. The fourth thing that this device does is apparently teach the ability to move from head-centered to heart-centered emotion. And that measurement may be considered subjective because it's based on having done this with thousands of people. When the peak is right here at 1.0, this is the EI, or emotional index, which is the Y value, musical key signature of that peak. People usually report feeling intellectual satisfaction. When the peak is over here at 0.618, which is where Julia started and where they've gone back and forth to when they were feeling open. When the peak is right here, that's the golden mean ratio, 0.618. Hello. Okay. So when you're in your heart, it's there. And this peak here corresponds to the sacred geometry of the square root of the golden mean ratio and corresponds to people usually reporting feeling peaceful. Okay? So in fact, these three blue lines are the sacred geometry of golden mean ratio, square root of golden mean ratio, and 1. And those three are the generalized parking places for most people's EKG's musical key signature when they stabilize. So in fact, this is an introduction to sacred geometry right here. When Zen went to golden ratio here, we could ask Zen, were you thinking about feeling open as opposed to intellectual satisfaction? This is sometimes called the CEO position. Yeah, see Zen's up here. Zen actually moves back and forth very beautifully. Both of these folks are doing wonderfully here because you have range of emotion and you have the ability to entrain and you have coherence. So really, you guys, very good. This is the spiritual country here. We see this ability to ascend here, which is the number of harmonics included, ascends. So just to finish the description of the screen here, here we describe the millisecond interval between heart harmonics called the beat intervals. And in this case, we're measuring Julia. And this would be the wave that corresponds to Julia's breathing. It's a little noise event here. And by spectrum analyzing the low frequencies of the heart, we get the heart rate variability. So among other things, we can learn the skill to entrain your breath with your heart. This display of the heart rate variability is about the only thing the HeartMath device displays. We display this plus the coherence display. Yeah? So we believe this is the first time coherence has ever been measured. The heart rate variability time history waterfall here is very much discussed in the medical literature, and we cover this in detail in the weekend course. But to oversimplify, when this cascade is harmonically inclusive, then in fact harmonic richness means you have become fractal and able to invite lots of different frequencies in your body, which corresponds to a predictor for health. When this peak here is at 0.2, it means the primary frequency of her breath is at 5 cycles per second. 5-second cycle for the breath. So you can learn about entraining your breath with your heart using the device. Yeah? Does anybody have any basic questions about how the heart tuner works or what it is? Yeah? A simple definition of coherence. Yes, thank you. That's the right question. When the soldiers are marching across the bridge, if all the soldiers come into the same step, the bridge begins to vibrate because the soldiers are going over in phase. So they're stepping in time. Well, that columnation or in-phase-ness of a wave such that the marching becomes efficient because the waves are all aligned is the difference between a flashlight and a laser. And that ability to become coherent literally means that all the soldiers have learned to share space elegantly. And that's exactly what the heart learns when this peak goes up. The thing that's new here is we never were able before to measure the internal coherence of such an oscillator. So the other things that this device is used for, where we enter one channel, we put these electrodes on your brain, and we set the high gain here. This is switchable to high gain. We can also switch the heart rate variability between channels. So this device can display a brain and a heart and compare the coherence of your heart with your brain. And we can also put this, as you'll see in a minute in the fusion implosion PowerPoint animated slideshow, that we're able to measure life force with this device. But what I'd like to do now is introduce the significance of this sacred geometry, which appears to relate to compassion. That, in fact, when our volunteers here come to this golden mean ratio, look at that. Very responsive, Zen. That was very nice. So the actual activity of what you do is, for example, we had some friends here on the other night who were looking at this, and they were asking themselves why they were addicted to smoking. And every time they would ask themselves a question which got close to an emotional issue, the heart would fire up. So you could immediately use it as a diagnostic tool to see when you're getting close to the truth behind the emotional issue at hand. So in fact, the heart is literally a lie detector in this sense, that it doesn't fire up unless you're speaking your truth. So in effect, coherence is a measure of pure intention, because it's a measure, literally in physics, of how a wave becomes shareable. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to show you very gently what this ability to cohere the vacuum might mean in terms of the ability to produce fusion. So that, for example, before, when Zen went right here at golden ratio, he creates a musical frequency signature in the heart which permits collapse, permits fusion, permits the making of centering force. So you're about to see a little summary of some evidence which leads us to believe that the ability to cohere the vacuum is directly related to the ability to become emotionally coherent. So this is an introduction to some of the visuals we'll be using on the weekend. Essentially what we want to do is teach the physics of implosion and learn about how that applies to what we just saw in the heart, the ability of the heart to make that centering force. And I think we're going to begin this conversation by talking about the ether or zero-point background energy. Actually, Martin Selecki was kind enough to bring this vortex generator here this evening. But it turns out we had some logistical difficulties, and we couldn't show you this lovely vortex machine spinning. But as later we begin talking about tornadoes, we're going to see that the nature of these vortex devices is literally able to cohere the vacuum and create a source for voltage from gravity. And how that works in physics is actually tunable and able to be optimized by such devices that take a spectrum analysis of charge and measure for coherence. So here is an image, this is actually from the cymatics literature, on visualizing the ether or zero point or background energy and what it would take to cohere that. It's like you've got this unified field, right? Physics says there's 4 fundamental forces, but now we know that they're all made of the same substance. Okay, they're just at different frequencies and wavelength ratios. And so once you get that unified field, the religion of Jesus and Einstein understood, then you have the appropriate challenge of understanding the role of mind among waves. The role of mind among waves is to make that still point where waves can converge non-destructively. And that's called collapse in physics, and it appears to be identical with the very nature of compassion. So this is what we're talking about making your dent in the world, that if you want to have a wave stand, then you have to create that wave in such a way that it's in phase, and the symmetry can nest on a folded surface. Essentially, all immune systems, all soap bubbles, all cell membranes are a folded surface. And to make the wave stand non-destructively on that surface, you have to make your dent in the world, right? For the wave to stand, it has to be in phase. In biophysics, it's called structural stability and morphogenesis. It's the title of a book. It means that all cell membranes exist because the waves which stand on their surface are musical. literally in phase. So measuring that coherence of standing waves is the ability to make matter out of light. That if you have that compressible media and you get a wave standing, then that's called matter. The way it works is, in physics, if a wave goes in a line, you call that wave energy. If the same wave were to begin going in a circle, the wavelength divides evenly into the circumference. That's called quantum mechanics. When the wave goes in a circle, that same wave is called mass. Do you know why? It's because when the wave goes in a circle, it stores a little bit of inertia. And in physics, we measure how much inertia is there, and that's the only definition or measurement any physicist has ever had for mass or matter. So literally, God is the feller who taught the wave to go in a circle. Got it? It's that simple. The issue of creation is the ability to move the wave into a circle from a line. When the wave goes in the circle and it then makes the L or phase shift from the circle back to the line, that's called the raising of the Jedi Knight, or the Shem On, the Highward Firestone, or literally the sword and the stone. And that L or phase shift is the origin of the word Elohim, those who were able to make the L or phase shift. And it's as simple as this. If your habit had been to attend to the wave node, which we're calling matter, the waves converge, make a little pressure bubble, go away, and then the pressure and rarefaction happens in the same place every time, just like this picture. The resistance of change of position of that place, that inertia, is called matter. Well, if your habit has been to attend to the wave node, the place where there's compression and rarefaction in the same place, then you're stuck on the cross. Do you see? So if you want to get off your cross, follow me, right? And what you do is you lift your attention from the wave node to the wave itself. But that L or phase shift is a translation of vorticity, a movement of inertia from the circle back to the line. And the spin path which idealizes that, obviously, is the golden mean ratio. It's called optimized translation of vorticity in hydrodynamics. But now have we explained the Sufi koan, which says, only love bends the light, so only love creates. Yeah? You see that if you, in fact, create long wave phi ratio, low phi, love, you make that 0.618, which creates that implosion, that centering force, the suction to the center, which bends the light from the line into the circle. You see? Only love bends the light, therefore only love creates. So this is a little introduction. So that this geometry of these three-dimensional standing waves makes these wave packets, and things come to a head because the ratio of the waves, when it's golden mean ratio, permits adding and multiplying, and we're going to see more pictures of that. So that when waves converge, what happens is they always form a toroidal or donut-shaped magnetic field because, in fact, that is the only self-organizing waveform. There's x and y and z axes of spin on the surface of a folded donut, yes? And that x, y, and z axis spin superposed means you have three gyroscopes which are perpendicular, and that's called inertial navigation systems at NASA, right? In other words, you can't be pushed around. So when you store inertia in three axes of spin, you in fact create vorticity, and when you connect up those tornadoes, that's called string theory or wormholes. And we're going to talk about how mind can steer tornadoes. And we see that all of physics is made of those compression waves of tornadoes. So this is a three-dimensional model of a compression wave on a folded surface. In this case, it was intended to describe the perpendicular axes of the perpendicular field effects of the, let's call them the perpendicular equators of the galaxy, the solar system, and the Earth. And their relative tilt angle nutates toward 90 degrees. It's called the erection of the Holy Cross in the work by Nick Fiorenza. And so if you see that compression wave converging on the sun, you see why the sun does a solar maxima, an orgasm, the Christians call rapture, which is simply a response to the need to compress, by which we're going to see more about how then stars and planets experience those gravity relations erotically. And so that survival of compression is, in fact, the test, the appropriate test for immortality. We'll talk more about that. On the bottom right, we see that 3 axes of spin superposed is 3 dimensions. So dimensions itself is a name for the number of axes of spin you superpose. So by nesting these vortex donuts, we get the Platonic solids and the atomic table. So every time we're talking about one of the Platonic solids or an atom in the atomic table, we're only talking about tornadoes that have learned to stand on their head in such a way that they can agree with each other. And that's called symmetry. So then we have some 3-dimensional models of how the Platonic nesting of donuts makes the atomic table quite literally. And then we have the pictures of how the cube nests in the dodecahedron. Most of you have seen this before, that if I took that blue cube, which is tilted 32 degrees from you, from the screen, and I tilt it, I see that there's 5 cubes in that dodecahedron. So that's the way in which the solution to the tesseract, the hypercube, the next dimension, is literally the relationship of the cube and the dodecahedron. So if I take that 5 cubes inside with 7 cubes outside on the top left, I see that I'm beginning to have a little cookbook. I got 6 cubes around 1, 7 cubes outside, and then 5 cubes inside. And that's going to become a symmetry operation for creating the anu, the tourbillon, the scrollwork made of light by which we get hydrogen. It's a geometry of a slipknot. Slipknot cosmic donut maker. So this nesting in the Platonic solids is called the geometry of connectivity here. I'll just play this in a little higher resolution now. You see that this is what's modeled in this Star Mother kit, which is available here. You can talk to Victoria and order these. I've got in the center 2 red tetrahedrons. I just landed 2 red tetrahedron in there, and I put an octahedron in the center, a cube around the outside, stellate the cube. The cube's edge is square root of 2. Well, cube's edge is 1. The tetra is the square root of 2. The dodeca edge is 0.618, and the ecosa edge is 1.618. And if I spin that, it kind of leaps into 3D. So all I'm doing is showing you the nest of these Platonic solids, and we're now going to see how that makes the atomic table. Here's the 7 spins, 7 symmetry axes of the tetrahedron, which index becomes the Hebrew alphabet, we'll see in a minute. And here's the 5-7 symmetry group, which is the origin of this thing called the greater maze in theosophy. It's the nest of all the Platonic solids. So if I look at the implications of the fact that the best way a donut can nest is in the symmetry views of the tetrahedron, I get the physics of the origin of the rainbow there, where when the photon donut gets into a traffic jam, it's sorted into the 7 tilt angles of the tetrahedron, which I call the origin of the rainbow, which we call the origin of the rainbow. But see the white light there? So in effect, the rainbow has 7 colors because the tetrahedron has 7 axes of spin. This is the clairvoyant view now of these tornado vortex nested into the Platonic solids, which then we call the atomic table, a nesting of tornadoes. So, and this is the atomic table tetracube octa in the outer symmetry geometry, periodic law according to Crookes. And here's a 3-dimensional version of that, and you see the lemniscate view. Here's 5 tetra in icosa. I'm going quickly here because I want to get to the implosion part of this. So the atomic table, when seen, it's not that your valence chemistry instructor was wrong. It's just they didn't tell you that the s, p, d, and f suborbitals, were in fact 1, 3, 5, 7 vortex donut pair, which is 2, 6, 10, 14 electrons, and that's called an SPDF suborbital. So you've made the atomic table when you nest 3 donuts in a cube, 5, 7 in dodeca ecosa. Further here, and this is part of the advanced material for the weekend, the nuclear geometries, the nucleus is also in the symmetry of the Platonic solids. So the point here is the amount of gravity in an atom is predicted by the self-similarity of the nucleus to the electrons. The amount of gravity in anything is predicted by the self-similarity, fractality of the inside to the outside. How would that predict the amount of gravity in your compassion? There's a question. So here we're looking at that self-similarity of the dodeca, where the radius of the inner sphere of a dodecahedron to the outer sphere of a dodecahedron predicts the orbital radius of the Earth to Mars orbit. I'll play that again since you kind of missed that. So there's the Earth orbit, and there's the inner sphere in a dodeca. Now here's the outer radius of that same dodeca, which is the radius of the Mars orbit. So in effect, we're seeing the solution to Kepler's dilemma. How were the planetary orbital ratios determined by the Platonic solids? Here's the tilt of the cube in the dodeca. Here's the spin of the Earth as dodeca in the zodiac as dodeca. And here we're tilting from look at the inside. There was the 510 view of the Icosa, 72 degrees, to the 612 view of the purple Icosa, right there. So this is what we call our soap bubble animation. Some of you have seen this before. But the concept of it is important because it's called dodeca bubble. That here, play all frames, this is a model of the three-dimensional geometry of something called scale invariance. So they say, if you wish to survive the rapture, assume the position. If you wish to survive death, assume the position. The position is in the symmetry that permits non-destructive compression. Non-destructive compression is the solution to computing and the solution to dying. It's the solution to how waves become shareable. It's a solution to what happens in DNA at the moment of death. The dodecahedron is able to non-destructively compress because it is scale invariant. That means you can change scale without changing ratio. And that is a clue to feng shui, for example. When you choose your place to die with good feng shui, the little hill of the sacred burial ground is fractal or self-similar or scale invariant to the big mountain in the distance. So the ability to propagate your spirit into the stars is limited by how much you inhabit a fractal. Yeah? That's going to get to the advanced material where we see why, in order to be inhabitable, any shape must be self-similar. So this scale invariant demonstration really sucks. I mean, I sucked the air out of the soap bubble, right? Well, what we're essentially doing is demonstrating the physics of why scale is profane and ratio is sacred. And that is then going to describe why the DNA and Earth grid and zodiac here are modeled on that dodecahedron, because it is scale invariant and compressible. So the spin path down the dodecahedron, and we want to particularly thank Jonathan Quinton, sacredgeometry.com, for some of these animations. This optimized translation of vorticity, golden mean spiral, becomes kind of the heart of the matter. And the same spiral, spiraling rectangles, spiraling triangles, is called this optimized translation of vorticity, yellow brick road to Oz, spin path to the 0 point. So we see now why the finger of God touching man on the Sistine Chapel is golden mean ratio, because it can compress charge to a spark gap, where the harmonic content of the spark gap where the fingers touch is infinite or infinite, and that's how you make phone calls to God. The geometry that permits that charge compression is called phyllotaxis. And this is perfect unpacking or perfect branching based on golden mean ratio here in the cut of the celery leaf and the unpacking of a tree. That was the top view. Here's the side view. It's a 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13 branching all-go rhythm, and it leads to the golden mean ratio. Yeah? And this is the family tree of a male bee. The perfect unpacking geometry is also the geometry of perfect packing. So that leaf that's unfolding in the Fibonacci progression says, what's the best way to share delight? So in effect, this geometry of perfect decompression and perfect compression is the solution to the geometry of perfect sharing or wave distribution. To become shareable in that sense for a wave or for you is to become immortal or sustainable. So if we take that geometry, we're now going to look at how the egg is a solution to gravity making. Faraday said the capacitive field takes the form of an inductive field. Capacitance is charge. Charge is measured in farads. Anybody remember Celestine prophecy? All human interactions are about charge. Yes? In other words, when you're hugging somebody, you're looking for charge. So when a physicist goes to the grocery store to shop for an egg, the way a physicist finds out if an egg is fresh is by measuring the DC voltage end to end. Did you know that, huh? This is the egg here. This is with thanks to Walter Baumgartner. But what I want you to just think about with me for a minute is, we knew before that the voltage difference end to end of an egg was proportional to the difference in curvature from the sharp end to the narrow end. And when you measure the DC voltage in that egg, you measure the freshness. Now, if you get to the grocery store and you want to check your eggs for freshness and you don't happen to have a DC voltmeter with you, what? You don't usually take one. What you can take with you instead is something that you might have handy, your tongue. And there's a difference in warmth versus coolness, and you can feel a little spark of the voltage, yes? Well, so the old information was that, in fact, the egg is fresh in proportional to the DC voltage end to end. That's old news. The new information is, where did the voltage come from? Cliff Pound here has been wanting to make a zero-point energy device all his life, right? Where's Cliff? Right? So the question becomes, where do we get a gizmo that makes voltage from gravity? Well, let's see. Let's study a human or a living egg, right? Now, here is the wind of charge capacitance called gravity going past an egg. Note the difference in curvature from one end to the other is exactly like an airplane wing. So there's a difference in electrical pressure end to end, which was Tesla's name for voltage. When Townsend Brown built the nonlinear dielectrics to make flying saucers with capacitors, he used baked egg whites because they're such a cool capacitor. Ain't it interesting? So when a pine cone changes the flexure of its structure to change the relative tilt from end to end, it's modulating how much voltage it's getting from gravity. Where I'm going with this is, how does the heart get its voltage from gravity? Which is the physics of enlightenment, yes? So that's where we're going with this. We have a new definition of life force. Celestine Prophecy said all human interactions are about charge. We're extending that to a new definition of life force for electricians and maybe even psychologists. Life force is the ability to attract and self-organize charge. And how does it happen in an egg? The same way it happens in your heart. This is how. The egg adjusts the geometry of its lines of charge, the capacitance right here, the same way a pine cone does. Pine cone opens and closes in order to change how much voltage it gets from gravity. So this is a zero-point energy device, right? And how does it work? Here's a top-down view now of that egg, and it's a top-down view of the pine cone. It also happens to be a top-down view of your DNA and your pineal gland. And since every living biological protein is five-sided, it seems that life has something to do with this picture, right? So what is the solution? And now I'm going to explain to you the solution to Einstein's unified field, and you're going to understand it better than any physicist on this planet. And you're ahead of them, believe me. And it's that simple, and you can understand for yourself. Okay? So here's Einstein. Einstein is just staring down into a black hole, and he said, if I could model the geometry of infinite non-destructive compression, I'd know how to get voltage from gravity and why black holes bend time. Well, he didn't understand the geometry of self-similarity or fractality optimized by the golden mean ratio, which is then this three-dimensional fractal, the stellated dodecaecosa. He didn't understand the geometry of infinite compression, which you now understand. So now, let's ask ourselves if we understand why that makes gravity. Why is it so important for you to know how to make gravity? Because as the sun goes to its solar maximum, only the biological structures that are able to make gravity survive. Okay? That, in effect, DNA is a device for fabricating local gravity, as is your bliss. So we're going to look at the geometry of what enables that fabrication of a gravity wave, and here's how it works. Please, this is the point of the whole evening, so I beg of you to follow me with this one, okay? Wavelength A meets wavelength B, and they have kids, wavelength C, okay? That's called conjugal relations. It's very sexy, okay? In physics, it's called phase conjugation, but the meaning in physics and the meaning in genetics is the same. The meaning is the waves must both add and multiply, because recursive adding is multiplying. It happens that only the golden mean ratio gives waves the geometry where wavelength A and wavelength B can meet and cross, making wavelength C such that A plus B equals C and A times B equals C. That's called an arithmetic and a geometric progression. Only the golden mean ratio permits that. So what happens? You get recursive adding and multiplying of the wavelengths. Well, that's pretty simple, isn't it? You get infinite non-destructive interference. Another way of saying you get infinite constructive interference, because with that sexy conjugal relations, you got all children that fit the nest. So the kids didn't fight. Get it? Very simple. It's like family relations. Well, how is that the solution to gravity? This is very important now. This is the essence of the science of the evening. That when wavelength A and wavelength B meet, they're literally surfers, okay? Have you ever watched a surfer when the wave is going this way and the surfer's doing this, and then he's got the crest of the crash of the wave coming this way, so he's following the lip of the curl. And when the curl collapses on the other wave, the wave velocities add and multiply, and he comes shooting out of that curl like he's been shot from a gun, right? Well, the physics of this is exactly that. Wavelength A and wavelength B in the physics of heterodyning, and I'm speaking strictly solid hard physics now, is that the wave velocities add and multiply. So wavelength A and wavelength B have children not just in wavelength but in wave velocities. The phase front of wavelength A meets the phase velocity of wavelength B, and they shoot forward a child whose wave velocity is the addition and multiplication of the parent waves. And that adding and multiplying of wave velocities produces acceleration. And so the wave right here has been pushed through the speed of light. Now, if you know anything about Einstein, you know exactly that acceleration and gravity are identical. They cannot be differentiated. If you produce acceleration, you've got gravity. Okay? So the fact is that when you pull the drain in your bathtub, when you pull the drain through the speed of light here, what you do is create the suction for charge that can go through the speed of light at the center. And that wind of charge going between frequencies through the speed of light is called gravity. Now, why did I have to go to so much trouble to do that little song and dance when you didn't even come here to be physicists? Because that is the only way to get the zipper through the wormhole of your DNA through the speed of light, called getting a soul. In other words, your DNA and your children know very well that it is fatal, and I mean fatal, to be caught below the speed of light. Therefore, they're willing to risk death very appropriately rather than not have the bliss that can accelerate the wave through the speed of light in the tornado up the zipper of their DNA, called getting a soul. The fringe benefits from the corporation, if in fact you get your tornado through the speed of light, called getting a soul, are you can lucid dream, bardo navigate, carry memory through death, travel in time without heavy metal, which is very embarrassing otherwise. So, in effect, the skill to get that implosion, this is the physics of fusion. This is the physics of enlightenment. This is the physics of artificial intelligence. This is the physics of wave self-organization. This is the physics of how some waves appear to become self-steering. It's wormhole physics. So here's the side view of what we just saw from the top view. The pine cone steers the waves to the point of implosion. It's called pining away, as in charging the battery of yearning in Gurdjieff, right? So this braiding process happens because you can take any two numbers and add them and get the next number forever. Or you could take any number in the progression multiplied by 1.618 and get the next number forever. 1.618 squared is 2.618, etc. That produces a geometry of a spin path or a cascade to the 0 point. That spin path, called perfect damping, the caduceus, is based on the golden mean ratio. Perfect damping in radio theory is also based on the golden mean ratio. Golden mean ratio here and golden mean ratio here. And that's a compression wave, and that's the solution to the scalar or torsional field effect. So the role of mind among waves is this. The role of mind among waves is to produce the centering force that holds the little tornado inside the next bigger tornado. And that ability to make the still point is how the violinist chooses the note. When you go to the Gurdjieff school, if you want to do the sacred gymnastic, first thing you do is put your attention in your little finger until you can feel a tingle there. The electrical force of your attention increases as you charge the battery of yearning. You actually charge the battery of your attention until you can put your center of attention in the center of the sun and steer that. And so that ability to make that spin path in the wormhole becomes the ability to self-refer, which is the Vedic definition of consciousness. So the only angle at which a wave can re-enter itself without hurting itself is the origin of self-reference, which is the definition of self-awareness. In other words, the tornado that learned how to feed itself. That's you and me. Yeah? So here's the tornado. And here we're talking about compressible waves storing inertia is the only definition we had for mass in physics. And here's the self-reentry path in the tornado. Here's the homework assignment. The homework assignment is you are a shaman in training in a Mayan village in South America, and there's a tornado approaching the town. And you have been given the assignment. Please go out and meet the tornado and steer it around the town, or we're all dead. Thank you very much. So you're a little nervous. Oh, your knees are shaking. And you step out from the town to meet the tornado because this is your assignment. You're the shaman. This is your job. You know, like the milkman has a job. Your job is steering tornadoes. So you look in your little manual under Shamanism 101 for Mayans, and there's instructions for steering tornadoes in there. It's true, actually. I learned this in a school in Atlanta, in Huntsville, Alabama. And sure enough, when you look in there, it says, in order to steer a tornado, what you do is you eat the hoocha of the approaching tornado. Hoocha. If you ask a shaman what it is to eat the hoocha, he says it means you consume the anger of the tornado as it approaches. What that is you're there and you begin to feel for the tornado better than it feels for itself by feeling its pain, and that's called eating the anger. And the physics of that is called embedding, and we can model it in the mathematics, and it's called the golden mean ratio. So a clairvoyant would see bioplasmic streamers going from your belly, the shaman, into the tornado, and electrically what you're doing is you're embedding yourself in the tornado electrically. And so you have become electrically, by creating recursion, recursive turning inside out-ness, called consciousness. You embed yourself in the tornado electrically, and so then you have become the center of gravity of the tornado, and that's measurable. The psychology of that situation, which psychologically is described as compassion, is that the tornado falls in love with you, the shaman, and begins following you around like a pet puppy dog, right? Because you only fall in love with pure intention, and when you do, you give away your center of gravity. Yes? Because you want your center of gravity to be as central as possible. And so that mathematics of embedding is the physics of how a short wave gets on a longer wave. You're the short wave, and the galaxy's the longer wave. So in effect, since string theory and wormhole theory proves that physics is nothing else but wormholes, the skill to steer tornadoes is the only skill required to bend matter. Do you see? So here's how it works. This is from the movie Twister. Step 1, stalk the tornado. Now here's where we're going to use Martin's little gizmo here. We were going to stalk the little tornado in here. So you got to visualize the props here. We didn't get it all together. Oh well. So step 1, you stalk the tornado. Step 2, in the movie Twister, you back a truck up to the tornado and you let the wireless telemetry balls be sucked in. Step 3, the computer models the angle of trajectory of the telemetry balls sucked into the tornado. Step 4. I hope there's a step 4. This could, oh yes, here's step 4 is make a picture of the angle which allows a tornado to become self-feeding. It's a slip knot. It's called a tourbillon, a scroll work made of light. And that arc angle of that, it's called an element of spin or an element of Phi's ray, a flame letter. Okay? So that angle of that spin path there becomes the map for something called the anu, which was the original subatomic particle, which in Monisadu the Tarot is called a tourbillon, a scroll work made of light. And what is that? Does that look familiar? That's called the anu. That is the shape, clairvoyance C, in the subatomic particle hydrogen, later justified in current physics in psi perception of quarks by Phillips. It's also the shape of the heart of the sun. It's also the shape of the human heart. 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. So that is a slip knot. Slip knot, cosmic donut maker. A slip knot to enable the possibility of compression. And that slip knot is called the Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Ring is the one who knows the angles at which you tie those slip knots. So just to play that little animation and get a little sense of that, that's called the alphabet of symmetry, and it's called the alphabet of the heart. Yeah? And that ability to make that little nest engender that little compression angle is related to what the Ring Lord dreamed. Yeah? So here's the Ring Lord. The Ring Lord says, I would like to identify these gold spirals on the side of this ring donut. Okay? So I'm identifying. Now this was derived, the Elven, from the Finnish, and the Finnish was derived from the Sumerian Anunnaki, which was the language of the Anu, the Draco, that arrived aboard Nibiru, which then became Hebrew. Okay? So we have a clue to the origin of these tilt angles, and these tilt angles were the angles required to look at the spin on the surface of a donut. This was sometimes called Adam's apple, or the fig leaf on Adam's apple. And you take a bite out of that apple, and you're able to segregate inertia, which is called evil, which simply means failure to embed. Anyway, if you're able to do that, what you do is you're able to compress the spin pass down into the DNA. Here's a picture in biophysics of DNA that under the condition of compression, it's called a toroidal DNA condensate. Condensate, condenser, to compress. When you compress DNA, it forms a ring lord, right? And when you do that, you get the possibility of implosion at the center, which turns DNA into a gravity-making device for creating implosion. So if I knew the tilt angles to compress DNA into the right map, I could take that slip knot right there, based on the Sadhu, the Anu, and I would use that as a template for steering the angle as the codon goes down into the DNA helix to make that compression wave. And this is how it would look. So I'm compressing the angle at which the helix is fabricated in order to get this deca-delta phenomena, which is the 5-7. So now I'm going to look at those tilt angles that I would use to make this compression. Here's the compression wave again. Same compression wave. And I want to make that compression wave. So now here's the mathematics I did. I took that compression wave and I topologically mapped on that compression wave this golden spiral. And then I use that donut in a donut from the compression wave. And if you compress charge at the synapse, then your wishes become objects. So if you were able to think in the language of light, you would be the ring lord. So here now you just need to be able to recognize the tilt angle, A, B. Here's that golden spiral on the donut. It's as simple as ABC. I haven't changed or bent that piece of wire. I've only changed your point of view. Okay? That's called consumed perspective, or e pluribus unum. It's the spin path to compression that would enable you to recognize the tilt angle at which a tornado was coming at you so that you could quickly grab it by its throat, thus allowing you to throw your weight around. Get it? So the ability to grab donuts quickly by their throat depended upon the recognition algorithm for the tilt angle of a magnetic donut called the origin of the alphabet. Do you see? So this is called the alphabet of symmetry. It's actually the alphabet of the heart. And if I were to then index that tilt angle of that donut with respect to the symmetry of the tetrahedron, I would have the Hebrew alphabet. There's pi, squares the circle, okay? So again, this ability to catch the vortex donuts, if I only nested the vortex donut field effects in DNA by the symmetry of the tetrahedron, I would have a golem. There's the 7 spins on the surface of a donut. Here's Aleph, Beit, container B, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, pi, squares the circle 5, etc. Okay, so this is an example of the language of light of the ring lords. This was the secret of the ring, in that only pure intention could hold this charge density, because in fact otherwise you would suffer the increase in charge that would result in the loss of spin here. So pure intention was required in order to create this ident I tie. There's a dimpling that happens where the little vortex is nested in the big vortex in there that requires the ability to discover what's shareable. So here's how compassion works now. This is from the biophysics literature, the book When Time Breaks Down by Arthur T. Winfrey. It's a model of the voltage wave that causes the heart to fire. And here's you feeling compassion. You make a picture inside your heart which is so self-similar to what's outside that the outside falls in. And that process of recursive turning inside-outness becomes implosive, self-organizing, and this dimple here is sucked in. When that dimple is sucked in, a longer wave is embedded, embedding, and so each time another donut is sucked in, a longer wave, ride the long wave, Uncle Joe, surfer, right? So this ability to catch longer and longer waves then shows up here in the frequency signature of the EKG as another harmonic right here. It's called ascension. Remember this Sedona bumper sticker? Ascend already, we need the space, right? So this does in fact create space, because by creating fractal compression, which is very feminine, you make more space for waves to unpack into. So that ability to create that compression is called implosion. And so the wave gets permission to approach center and turn inside out. It's called Merkaba, but it's literally a vehicle for the storage of pressure. Merk, mark, ab, from, pa, pressure. And so if we have this geometry of this flow form, the braiding algorithm down that cascade is such that the dishes are in golden ratio, and the beat rates of the dishes are in golden ratio, and the water here is impossible to sink in when you get in the spa. The physics of the increased specific gravity is proportional to the increase in laminar coherence, which is spin density. Spin density is awareness density, is information density. Compression is the solution. Whatever the problem, compression is the solution. Okay. So this becomes some very simple physics, that fractality is embeddability, is non-destructive compressibility, turning inside-outness, scale invariance, spin density, information density equals charge density equals life force equals sustainability. It's a perfect geometry of distribution, which is called phyllotaxis, which is how a wave becomes shareable, and that's literally applicable to how a product becomes marketable based on the same tree structure. So here we're just showing the braiding algorithm. Remember we talked about how you get a soul in your DNA, short wave yet, until at the X cross of the X ray of the X braiding of the X chromosome, you have this charge radiance that actually creates this squirt gun through the speed of light, which is called getting a soul, yeah, up the z-axis of your DNA. So when the ratio of the braiding is coherent, you get this field effect of perfect nesting, which looks like a fractal, the short wave on the longer wave yet. And so that ability to braid your DNA, the way we talk about this, is the magnetic axis where your DNA crosses itself to become radiant when recursive or embedded. So in effect, what happens, this is a little introduction to bliss here. The concept of bliss, let me see if I can explain this. We've looked here now. Let's turn the lights up for just a second here, yeah? We've looked here at the way in which the DNA responds to love. The DNA literally responds to love because it sees this series of frequency harmonics which cause the success of a braiding algorithm. So here's the DNA. It does this double helix little slinky thing, and you get this ratio of the long wave to the short wave in the DNA. That's ultraviolet, and yet your DNA is comprised of sound waves coming from your heart, which is bliss or euphoria. The sound wave is the long wave. It's the envelope, the wave on the wave, the carrier wave in ratio to the envelope. The answer lies folded in an envelope. So here's what happens mechanically. You're there, your heart's singing, you're feeling passion. There's a sonic ponytail, a phonon wave, that mechanically braids your DNA like a snake charmer. Da, 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 right? And so your DNA responds to coherent sound from the heart, like your thymus is a catcher's mitt, and won't shrivel if there's bliss. Yeah? And so the sound of your heart and the bliss coming from your heart cause your DNA to know how to braid. Braiding DNA is emotion the weaver. Yes, emotion controls the braid of DNA, and therefore which RNA is exposed. And therefore emotion is the programmer for DNA. Do you see? We know that emotion programs DNA. You get depressed, you get a cold. The virus is DNA. The new information is how. The how is that this low-frequency, long-wave sound coherence, the phonon ponytail of the heart, creates a braiding algorithm which creates this compression wave to implode in your DNA. In German, bliss is called Glückseligkeit. Yes? Do I have that correct there, dear? I do? See? Thank you, dear. So Glückseligkeit comes from, I'm sure I haven't pronounced it right, though, have I? Oh, okay, thank you. So selig means to have a soul, selig. Selige? Yeah? And Glückseligkeit means to have bliss. So to have bliss contains the idea of having a soul. In other words, you don't get a soul if you didn't get bliss. And that's the physics. The physics actually is that your DNA is not mechanically ignited unless you're able to have bliss or passion. So the ignition of your DNA is dependent upon locating your passion. If you don't, you're toast. Now, that gets to, we spend a whole day on this in the weekend when we talk about the extraterrestrial origin of DNA. And we tell a very colorful fairy tale about ETs, Anunnaki, and Draco, and it's very colorful, and it's just like very entertaining. But you don't even need the fairy tale to get to the bottom line. The bottom line is simple. When the ancestors who came here to do the genetic engineering, which we call the Bible, they came here because their DNA had fallen, the Nephilim. How did the DNA fall? It was very simple. They lost passion, the ability to create glandular juices to get the stuff to grab a hold of your DNA like a tornado and make it implode and spin. So to leverage your DNA is a three-dimensional, shape-shifting slinky worm, right? And so what happens is in the presence of bliss, your DNA goes from to this, a double helix, right? So that braiding algorithm creates a compression wave, the toroidal DNA, Lord of the Ring, and what happens is then your DNA starts imploding. And that implosion the fire in the center makes DNA like a, ever see a jellyfish suck itself along in the ocean? The fire in the center is sucking magnetism through the speed of light in the center, and that's what enables the DNA to become self-steering. It's the physics of artificial intelligence. So in effect, the DNA cannot steer itself and gets dizzy if you do not set it free. Literally dizzy. That's why the wheat and corn and soy that's been monocultured for 1,000 years, the DNA is pissed off. It's angry. That's why it makes mucus. Because it can't self-steer if you don't set it free. If you don't set the character in your own dream free, you don't learn from them, right? So degrees of freedom in magic and chemistry have the same meaning. The amount by which you can learn something new from the reaction is the degrees of freedom you give it. So all of this has to do with our ancestral origin. They came here looking for a heart of gold, and they were growing old. Looking for a heart of gold. No? So what happened is, when you lose passion or bliss, your DNA begins to decay as a wave. Yeah? And so you lose a soul. And so if you don't have a heart of gold in mean ratio, then in fact you lose this leverage to ignite your DNA. And the ignition of DNA is the storal to the mori. It's the bottom line. It's the happily ever after. So we do this whole song and dance, and we end up with a homework assignment. The homework assignment we do in detail on the weekend is, well, if we supposing we were to take this relatively seriously and say, I guess without bliss, DNA will never be sustainable. That means immortality depends upon bliss. Simple physics. Therefore, no one could argue bliss is the purpose of having DNA, and therefore bliss is the purpose of having a government. Any argument? No? Good. So we've agreed on a political platform, have we? Excellent, excellent. So now we know what to serve at McDonald's, right? So in order to have a government, you have agreement. Agreement is a model for implosion. So in fact, if you knew what people were for, you could make decisions. 4-year-old girl looks up at astrophysicist PhD father and says, Dad, am I going to become a star? You know what the answer is? Yes. Right? So that's the physics. When you walked into McDonald's and the waitress says, enjoy your hamburger, would you like chemotherapy with that? No, I don't. No. When the waitress says, enjoy your hamburger, what she really means is develop that into the charged radiance which will then serve the gene pool. Isn't that what your waitress at McDonald's? It's another way of walking home from the cappuccino bar and asking yourself, have I harvested any memory for the galactic core today? When you find a way for a wave to become shareable, it becomes immortal. So this is the way it works. Your doctor says, well, you got 2 weeks to live. Go home and sort your affairs. You walk home, you tip over your filing cabinet, and you begin to urgently look for what might be shareable in there. And every time you find something shareable, what happens? You're driving down the street, minding your own business, and you trip over a shareable thought, like how love affected the life of a little child, or why does phi equal 7/5 pi over e, right? Anything that contains pure principle. And what happens is when you trip over a shareable thought, your hair stands up. Right? Has that happened to anyone here? Yes? Yes? That's called a warm fuzzy or an angel hug, right? Well, the physics of that is that you became an attractor for charge, capacitance. You became a Faraday coil. You became a Van de Graaff generator. You became an attractor for capacitance. Why? Because you created a shareable thought. Well, your doctor, by telling you were about to die, created a self-unfulfilling prophecy. Because if now you learn how to only think and feel shareable thoughts, you get so much charge that you tingle so much that you never die. Get it? So death was invented by biology to gently persuade us to stop storing unshareable thoughts and feelings. Yeah? And that introduces nicely the concept of signature soundworks, biosonics, and biowaves. And so I want to try to explain a little bit of that from the beginning. So I'm going to use this little animation of harmonic theory, which is the understanding of why replace the missing harmonic and then become coherent works in therapy. So we're going to understand harmonics. Now we present this in a whole day of musical analysis, but I just want to play a little piece of this. Now note that was a translation of vorticity where I changed from one frequency to another in a perfect gradual array. And what I did here is I just took a harmonic analysis over time. The ah here, the ah is this sound. This is ah, e, o, And this e here, this is actually the shape of my tongue as I fill the center of the mouth. I'll play it one more time. Ah, e, o, Okay? So the e, by filling the center of the mouth, created a cascade. This is x, 2x, 4x, and 8x harmonic overtones. Between 0 and 4,000 hertz, I'm displaying the energy density over time in a color, landscape, waterfall, harmonic analysis of the sound aum, right? Well, here's what I want to show you, is that the harmonic choir, by translating the vorticity, by transitioning vowel sounds properly, is doing this. Does this look familiar? That's called a spin path to a 0 point, right? So what I do by translating the vorticity over time is I create a harmonic cascade, ah harmonically inclusive, e harmonically exclusive. The sound e in every language means separate me. The sound ah in every language means connect me. And that's in euphonics from John Michel's analysis of sound having a universal meaning. So when you eat dinner and you liked it, you say ah. But if you bump into a mouse and you don't like it, you say hee, right? So that's to create separation. And what you do is you fill the center of your the tongue filling the center of the mouth creates this cascade. Well, the nature of this cascade is eventually called bioacoustic habitat theory or signature sound works, where you locate the missing harmonic in the voice and then you actually play those harmonics in order to understand. So I'm going to hit play here. And what I have here is the harmonic content of Tom's voice. I hit play. Talk again.
All right, okay. So, if we can allow that or help that person to find their own truth. Allow them to have the confront to...
And now if I hit yelp, we'll have reverse speech. Okay. Okay. So now we're going to take a harmonic analysis of that. And I'm just going to give you an idea of how you locate a missing harmonic. If I hit analyze, and then I hit the octave harmonic cascade, and I'll hit the overview. Okay, so this is the harmonic content of Tom's voice over time, and I can see which spectra are present and missing. And so if I do some more detailed analysis, here we eventually pick out which frequencies are present and missing in the voice. And we can actually, like here's something that's rather high in energy density right here. So if we zoomed in here and we took out the other harmonics, so now we have a frequency at which there's a lot of energy density in this voice. And so now I'm going to check the database for that 559 hertz octave to 24.7 in the database, which is very evolved literature. It says flexor digitorum ring finger, stress to the ring finger, C sharp. So it's frequent that you're able to find issues in the body by looking for missing harmonics. Well, where does this take us to? This takes us to the idea of harmonic inclusiveness in general. So signature sound works and this is what we just demonstrated here is biowaves.com. Dan Kunkel, software available. It's very elegant and evolved literature. And Dan is writing the next software to link the heart tuner to voice spectrum analysis, where you can replace the missing harmonic in your heart with your voice and vice versa. You can also design the frequency equalizer for your favorite CD to feed your body the harmonic it needs, etc. So this is the concept of signature sound works, biowaves, bioacoustic habitat theory, taken to a limit condition. Well, I want to show you one more example of that just briefly so you can kind of get the idea. This is called heart voice. The theory of all of this is very simple. The more harmonics that can be in one place at one time, the more awareness is present. So literally, health is predicted by the ability to get many waves in one place. In other words, if you get harmonic inclusiveness or fractality, you become immortal. So replacing the missing harmonics gets you to the point where you can have as many harmonics as possible, and thus fractal and therefore sustainable. So the theory is practiced by literally finding the missing harmonic in the heart and comparing it to the voice. I'm just giving you this little example we did in Spain here. We took this analysis of the heart here, and we had an emotional index of 0.81, which gave us the musical key signature of the heart here, which corresponds in the table to a frequency of 158 hertz. And what we found in the spectrum analysis of this voice, in this case we're using the biosonics from Mary Soul, that the energy density of the voice here in D sharp was 158.63 hertz. So we find consistently that when you're speaking from your heart, it shows up in your voice and you can measure it. Okay? In this case, again, 158.65 hertz was the energy density in this spectrum analysis of the voice corresponding to the missing frequency or the present frequency in the heart. Again, 161, near 160 cycles per second. So we have all these ways to confirm that the heart and the voice are in phase, and you can repair a missing heart with the voice and vice versa. I want to show you one more little concept here. And by the way, this is the Biosonica website, or you can just find it in the Biosonics e-group. This is Mary Soul's work in Spain. But I want to show you one more little concept to give you the idea here. So Mary Soul is spectrum analyzing a voice here and notices that the energy dispersion is not fractal. Most of the energy of this voice is stuck in one frequency. So if one person is talking to you in one frequency all the time, you get a little bit bored because they don't change frequency when they're talking, right? So there's very little feeling in that voice, right? So you want a voice to be harmonically inclusive and not harmonically exclusive. But I want to tell you how we heal this person's voice. This is before and this is after. Mary Soul calculated the missing frequency of this voice here. She calculated that wavelength musically, multiplied by powers of 2, got a wavelength of color in light, went out to the yard in the hot Mediterranean, South Spain sun, tilted the angle of the prism, and so the guy is sitting inside the room, and there's a rainbow going up across his face with a blindfold on, and when the rainbow has the exact right color by calculation in his eyeballs, she takes the blindfold off, counts 2 minutes, and then says, now let's spectrum analyze your voice again. And we got this. And this was replicable. You could do it multiple times. You could replace a missing voice harmonic with the light and back and forth. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is something I would like you to really take home with you tonight. Mary Soul explained to me that this only works if you start with real sunlight. And I would like you to understand why. This is the clue to the key why when you go into your children's classroom and you install warm pink fluorescent lights, you can measure the attention span go way down. It's very measurable. Now, if you yank out those god-awful fluorescent lights and install sunlight, you can measure the attention span go way up. I would like you to understand the physics. The physics is that any wave that embeds in the sun has the possibility of fusion. You get it? So if you're out of phase with the sun, you're toast. It's called per-sun all I tie, right? Have some personality, right? So the point is that this is why Tutankhamun and the same guy, Quetzalcoatl, who later became Jesus, all taught a solar calendar. The sun's in there burping, magnetic fields in the symmetry necessary to ignite DNA. It's called the Mayan calendar, but it's just a map of the I Ching, which is the codons of DNA. So the Mayan calendar, by mapping the solar flares, was mapping how the sun was igniting DNA. So the sun, because of the spectral emission lines of hydrogen, being the physics of fusion, which Balmer series is a log function of golden ratio. So the sun's wavelengths are embeddability in essence. So if you want to teach fusion, literally how to embed, you teach a solar calendar, because that is the physics of how you embed in the sun. And the sun is the only being with enough gravity, inertial escape velocity out of here. So most souls, when they die, they don't get past the Van Allen belts. But if you really want to get out of here, you do this thing called the Amenti principle. The Amenti principle is the physics that says that if you get enough bliss in your soul group, the ultraviolet tantric excitement ignition cocoon of that group becomes navigable through the sun. That's the happily ever after, yeah? So what you do is you use your landscape, which is a zodiac star map, like a magnetic lens for accelerating your group bliss through the sun. Leading Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun, right? So that's what Tutankhamun Prophecies, the best solar physics on the planet, book by Maurice Cotterell, is about. Okay? It's about the geometry of magnetism to make for the possibility of ignition based on the phase map of the heart of the sun. Yeah? So that's what harmonic theory is about. Harmonic theory is getting the waves in the symmetry necessary to create that compression that can accelerate soul groups. Yeah? I knew this guy. His name was Max in Hawaii, and he was a famous healer. And there's pictures of ultraviolet little beings around him when he does all this miraculous healing. And he's a scanner. And he remembered growing up as a Draco in China. And his ancestral family is literally draconian, right? Now, the interesting thing about Max is that he's had about, I think, 7 medically documented flatline, dead, just totally dead experiences. He's had near-death experiences 7 times, right? So he's doing Groundhog Day with trying to die and get it right, right? Now, why would you do Groundhog Day with the death process? You need practice, right? Well, so how do you practice dying? Well, the idea is if you're unconsciously aware that if you're consciously aware that your DNA is not going to make it through the solar maximum, you practice dying, right? So some people function better with dead lines, right? And so the sun provides that for us by providing a pressure wave, a maximum. It is not that the sun wants to toast most of the DNA on the planet. The sun, by nature of its experience of orgasm gravitationally, is needing the steering mechanism. How many million children sang together on the Earth healing days, and on those times, twice, they measured the effect on the solar flares. So the gene pool has the capacity to fabricate the gravity wave that could, in fact, steer the sun. And this is, in fact, survival related for our gene pool, yeah? This is called the Harmonic Module Project. And in fact, the software to link hearts over the internet is already in the demo on the website, heartcoherence.com, right? So that eventually we'll be able to link 1 million hearts, right? And show the phase lock and create the harmonic module. It is true that almost all the solar astronomic books like Genesis and the Typhon series and the wonderful book Uriel's Machine and the Sipapu concept in Hopi, they all end with the comet is coming, right? And in fact, they projected in Hale-Bopp dragging in a parasitic sun cruisers infested with Dracos now circulating in the orbit between Sun and Mercury. No matter how you look at it, they use the comets as towing machines for artificial planetoids. In fact, the very origin of the word apocalypse supposedly came from when they said the orbit of Hale-Bopp had such elegant mathematics that it in itself was evidence of intent. And the word apocalypse came from the 4th Horus man of the epic of the ellipse, ellipse. And the ellipse was from Horus. That epic predicted. And in fact, you can see those sun cruisers, which supposedly are filled with Dracos around the orbit of Mercury. So you have lots of description about the effect of comets on the planet Earth. And even the total recall was about a comet's miscalculated trajectory costing Mars its atmosphere. And in Uriel's machine, they're saying that the doorway to the caves predicts the angle of that comet all over Europe, that the angle at which the caves became survivable, predicted the angle of the splash or the gravity field of those comets. So yeah, that's all over the literature. Even in, and this might be a good metaphor for the pure principle, the movie Fifth Element. So in effect, the fifth element was love, but love was that which created a gravity field able to steer an incoming star. Right? So the ability to create leverage on gravity fields determines the survival of the gene pool, really. And so my belief would be that there's a wide variety of things which will test the gene pool for its ability to stabilize its own gravity bubble. I would give you the geomantic suggestion. Here's a geomantic suggestion. If you were flying by a local solar system like ours, and you might notice the gravity emanations were getting a bit smelly, and so the local real estate value might go down. So the way they fix it, if you ask the Arcturians, is they do something called planet taming. They plant the Arthurian myth from the Ark on the Taurus, the Arthurians, the Arcturians. And this is the book 2/3, if you're interested, David Myers, David Percy. And it explains the concept of planet taming. It isn't an insult to a horse that it needs taming. It might be the best horse, right? The fact is, until you get the gene pool to recognize how to feed their gravity bubble with their emotions, the local real estate values go down because the gravity emanations are smelly. Gurdjieff said, coherent emotion feeds the sun, incoherent emotion feeds the moon. So, in effect, what the Merlin, Arcturian myth geomantically were they were the instructions to planet taming. Examples. When they planted a crop circle the shape of the hat of Osiris, which is the pericardium of the heart, they were telling us, unless you get the muscles to flex and control the shape of the pericardium, you will not be a star navigator, because that's how you steer the gravity field generated by a heart. So the ability to have muscles around the pericardium to shape it is the same as the ability to have muscles around the retina to focus your eye. To focus the gravity thrust of the heart as a rocket nozzle, you need the ability to have that control of your heart coherence. The heart tuner is an example of that educational process. So the Arcturian planet taming came to this. They planted these dolmen, which were at the tetrahedral latitudes, if only Hoagland understood. And what you do by planting the dolmen at the tetrahedral latitudes was you modulate the nutation, spin rate, of the planet to phase embed zodiacal spins and thus stabilize gravity to hold atmosphere. So the ability to keep the long wave magnetic lines in phase, and I mean in a fractal, is the ability to hold the atmosphere. For example, gold only occurs where magnetic lines cross in a fractal, and you remove the gold, you remove the long wave magnetic embedding, which holds the atmosphere. Atmosphere is held because the long wave magnetism is fractal to the short. So long wave grid engineering magnetically is the skill to fabricate atmos on the atmosphere to make a planet green. So all this came under the concept of planet taming, was this idea about making planets able to be self-organizing electrically. And how you did that was by tuning the harmonics of spin. See, what gravity is the wind of charge inertia moving between frequencies, something for which physics has very little name other than scalar or torsional or chirp. But when the inertia moves between the long wave and the short wave, then that cascade of compression acceleration we call gravity. It's a spin path through the speed of light. Now, if in fact the long wave spin of the zodiacal spin is a harmonic of the wavelength of the nutation spin, which is a harmonic of the wavelength of the actual planet spin, you see that when the ratio is a multiple of golden mean there, you get a compression wave between frequencies. And that implosion stabilizes gravity, and that's what holds atmosphere. But at a deeper level, it is that symmetry specifically that enables the birth of consciousness. What happens is, it is said they took 1,254 star systems, the Ophanian angels, and cast a cat's cradle shadow, an image of themselves in their image and likeness, the physics of astrology being a cat's cradle of charge, capacitance. And thus they create a area here where the solar system is so fractal that we get more gold in our veins and more psychokinesis in our DNA, because this is the place to die and thus live. It's the place where you can be born in a fractal. So this is why solar systems, real estate value, location, location, and location, so many ETs are in line here to make use of what has become the best genetic library this side of the galactic core. So all of this physics is about what we talk about in the third day when we talk about the extraterrestrial origin of DNA. The Ben Bentoff story goes like this. So there he was having intense kundalini in his solar plexus, right? And he realizes that when the electrical field around your body, the sort of hydrodynamics, plumbing 101 for kundalini, gets big and you move, you can feel that there's a crackling in the rafters of the room, and the crackling in the rafters of the room, you have to remind yourself that it's outside your body because it feels like it's inside your body. And eventually, in your kundalini, when you wiggle, you're quite aware that you're wiggling the planet, a bigger wave, a longer wave. So Ben Bentoff is up there, and he wiggles the planet, and the planet Gaia comes over and says, "What do you want? I'm busy." And Ben Bentoff, author of Stalking the Wild Pendulum, biomechanical engineer, and the physiology of Kundalini, says to the planet, well, I would like the boon of seeing through your eyeballs. A long wave. And the planet says, well, okay, but you're going to do something for me. So the planet takes Ben through its eyeballs, and he zooms out, and he sees a bunch of visions, which become the book, the cosmic comic book by Ben Bentoff, which I highly recommend. And the pictures to this story fill that book. And so he zooms out, and he sees that the shape of what we've been calling our universe is a saddle shape like this on the surface of a donut. So what we had been calling the Big Bang is in fact a continuous creation, book by Dwayne Elgin, based on a continuous compression wave coming inside and outside. And what astrophysicists call the curvature of our known universe is a little saddle on the shape of a donut. Big, long wave. And then Bentoff zooms out further, and he sees that galaxies replicating is a nest hierarchical helical slinky array of these donuts. And if you zoom out far enough, it looks like a DNA helix, but it's billions of star system galaxies in an array, right? Long wave, right? So then he zooms out further, and he sees that when you look at this thing, it looks exactly like a living human cell. Okay. You're getting it. It's coming inside a body, right? Is this Ganesh? My angel is bigger than your angel. No. So he zooms out, and he sees that if you look above and below a replicating DNA helix as a biophysicist inside a cell, you see something called a centriole, which looks like a black hole if you're looking through your microscope, except that he's looking through a macroscope. And he sees that the black hole above and below the DNA helix, which is choreographing the alignment of the microtubules in this lovely nest, that these black holes have a shape. And as he looks at them, he realizes it's the letter Ankh, Aleph, and Omega. It's the shape of these black holes. The name and the shape and the service are one. And so the eddies in the wave train of the waveguide of the letters is what we call replicating galaxies, right? So he learns a lot. Comes back, draws the pictures. You got to get the book. And then we'll go to the movie. No. So he comes back. He comes back. And he says, well, what am I supposed to do for you? And the Earth says, well, we got this problem. There's a train down there in Siberia, and the conductor is asleep, had too much vodka. A bunch of people are about to die. Got to go down there and wake up the sleeping conductor. And so he did. Now, you know what the gene pool of Earth is? It's a train. and the conductor's asleep. Mhm. So that's how we get to the long wave. Any other? Any other questions? Yeah? Yes?
Could you offer your understanding of the photon field and its apparent approach and development of real estate?
I think the astronomic literature has been very clear that the photon cloud story was based on an incorrect rumor that came out of Australia, actually, that had very little astrophysics behind it. However, that being said, I believe that there is some very powerful physics behind the metaphor. The metaphor is that there is, in fact, a compression wave. And that compression wave, I think, corresponds astronomically to what has been described as the erection of the Holy Cross by Nick Fiorenza, which was that the galactic, solar, and Earth equators nutate to an approximately 90-degree perpendicularity between now and 2012. And as those field effects get to what would be called a, what do you call the cross in astrology? That as you create the stressor of the crossing of those magnetic planes compressing in perpendicular relationship, you create a compression that affects the sun and forces it into the orgasm we call solar maxima, approaching before 2012. And that says the sun must participate in the orgasm of galaxies. And in order to participate requires us, specifically that the gene pool must generate the gravity steering force necessary to survive that solar maxima. So I think the myth of the photon cloud was really a way to access the three-dimensional magnetic compression wave Christians had been calling rapture. The rapture goes like this if you're a fundamentalist Bible thumper. There are two people seated on the park bench, right? And one person says, I feel bliss, I feel joy, I feel euphoria, and I can hear the animals speak. And the other person says, I feel pain, I feel agony, I feel like I'm burning up, I'm melting, I'm melting. And they're both sitting on the same park bench, and they're both experiencing the same experience of magnetic compression. However, one person chooses to not need secrets. You walk into the Hopi meeting tent, and they say, come in and look at the flame. The only thing you need to leave at the door is the imagination that you would ever again want a secret thought. Right? So the privilege of entering the Phi's ray, fire, mind inhabits fire, is to leave behind the need for secrets, separateness. Yeah? It's called harmonic inclusiveness. So the reason that in the secret places of the lion smells for fear at the doorway to the temple is that it's a dimpling algorithm for the onset of compression. And at the doorway to temple, what you have is the magnetic compression that tests for what's shareable. So by sniffing for fear, the lion serves you by checking to see if you will be able to withstand compression non-destructively. Resistance to spin, called fear, creates heat. Yeah? So the way it works in bliss and euphoria is like this. Your body during bliss and euphoria, by the way, bliss and euphoria were measured at Monroe Institute when Ed Wilson found Fibonacci cascades in headphones created transcendence. And just minutes ago, we measured shareable waves. When we measured the EKG, created golden mean ratio, right? And then Korotkov in Russia measured euphoria and bliss as 0.62 golden mean ratio between adjacent brainwave harmonics. So three separate organizations have independently confirmed the electrical geometry of bliss and euphoria. It is not a mystery. Okay? The physics of that, what we had been calling enlightenment, which is simply successful charge compression, is such that you begin to suck your environment electrically into your body at such a rate that if your backyard is not fractal, it will drive you nuts. Okay? In other words, look, you're going to begin sucking the magnetism of your environment into your body very quickly. So in order for that to become sustainable, you do the feng shui for bliss. The feng shui for bliss is that you make a magnetic map of your bed, your house, and your backyard and your workplace. And wherever the magnetism looks like a rose, so too will your emotions. But where the magnetism looks like a dizzy, tangled up, knotted mess, you're going to find so too will be your emotions. That's why the Cherokee goes to a fractal to die. So this is one of the 4 major aspects of the hygiene for bliss. And we finished the weekend with a real conversation about the hygiene for bliss. What we're saying is that bliss and euphoria are simply the function of DNA and government to make immortality possible, as we discussed. And so the hygiene to make bliss sustainable replaces religion. Because if, in fact, you subtract the disempowerment of personality worship and miracle worship from religion, the only thing that remains is the simple physics and science of what makes bliss sustainable. And that is simply charge density. Charge density means life force in everything you eat and drink, only spring water and fresh squeezed and live food and that sort of thing. The hygiene for bliss includes the posture-induced ecstasy, the kinesthetics of bliss. And so we teach some of the kinesthetics of bliss process. We take another look at the Sufi turn, for example, in terms of the breath geometry that fabricates gravity. And Liv, who's here from Vienna, might even help us with a little bit of Gurdjieff's sacred gymnastic over the weekend. Yes, yes, maybe. And so we're going to do some tastes of the sacred movement, the sacred gymnastic for bliss process. And then we talk about the architecture for bliss. An architect can say, the house I've built is temple because you can measure the capacitance of the charge density in the room. Yeah? So that the successful architect actually measures the ability of the house he just built to attract charge. And I'll just show you some pictures in the Life Force article. So we've only completed about a third of this little presentation on implosion, and we'll finish this over the weekend. But I just want to show you this one picture just to give you an idea, since we've been talking about the measure of life force. Here, remember we talked about the voltage in the egg and the cohering of charge. Just to explain to you how we do this, I've placed a live living egg inside a biological capacitor. It's called an orgone accumulator, but orgone is a name for capacitance, yes? So now I'm going to spectrum analyze the charge emission of this egg. So I take this orgone accumulator, it's stone, copper, and hemp, okay? And I use it as a biological capacitor, and I amplify the harmonic content, the capacitance of that egg, the same way I amplify brain waves using this heart tuner. And the probe is available for this. It's inexpensive for the heart tuner. And here is the capacitance of this device before and after I put the egg in. I want you to see this to understand the simple principle. The egg added this cascade. See this cascade here? You see what that is? The egg is cohering charge in a wind between frequencies, which was not present here. That long wave coherence of the low frequency capacitance of that egg is the same way we take a device like this, and we take the same capacitor, a biological capacitive probe like this, and we measure also life force in trees and plants like this. It's hemp fiber in a high impedance probe, and we could take this around this device and measure when the capacitive field of this device was beginning to implode. So what we'll do, in fact, is look for the moment, and we can tune it to do this. Got a little leak here. Oops. So we can tune the device to implode, and in that way, we can optimize the charge wind to center, which causes it to become self-organizing. Remember when Schauberger's vortex device like that was about to generate voltage from gravity, he would know because it began to get cold. The reason it began to get cold was because of non-destructive compression. To optimize that process, we tune it. And we tune it by looking at the missing harmonics and replacing the cascade. I want to tell you about a couple things that relate to this. Here, we're actually measuring this in trees and plants. We can measure the capacitance of a tree before and after it's been affected with love. See if I have some of those. Yeah, here we are. The same device before and after someone hugs a tree. Now we're measuring the tree, not the person hugging it, but we could measure both. The harmonic cascade of the capacitive field is cohered, and that onset of coherence is the presence of love. So the embedding, the emotional wind that steers the magnetism into centering force can measure the life force in a tree similarly. I'd like to describe to you this principle as it applies to attention deficit and addiction healing. And we may just end with this little piece tonight. But just a little hint here. We just set up a clinic in Netherlands for attention deficit and addiction. The web article is Trance and Dance. All the web articles here are soulinvitation.com, soulinvitation.com / and then a keyword, in this case, trance and dance. So all we're saying here is that 70% sustained success in curing addiction and attention deficit and neurofeedback is well documented in America. The child sees a simple Pac-Man game here. The therapist looks for missing harmonics, and the child plays Pac-Man, and when the missing harmonic is replaced, the attention deficit and addiction go away. This is how you make your own fire. What you're doing is you're replacing the missing harmonic again, just what we talked about. Well, the present hardware that does this is very effective, eegspectrum.com. The problem is it costs $14,000. The heart tuner, which costs about $1,000 US, is now being designed to be able to do this work as well as what you've already seen. And I will show you the beta test software. It's called the Brain Tuner. And what we do there is the therapist, again, sees the power density of the alpha, theta, beta, and determines which harmonic is low in power and sets the filters for the various channels to a critical threshold to provide a positive biofeedback reward when you replace the missing harmonic. And so your movie doesn't move forward unless you're making the missing harmonic in your brain waves. Okay? And then you replace the harmonic content of alpha, theta, delta to balance them and create that cascade. And then you can see the power densities over time and the average coherence over time. The thing that's neat is now that we can measure coherence directly, we can make this whole process a lot more elegant. But do you see what this is? I just want you to understand what human attention is. You turn up the lights again there. Human attention is the moment at which you become an attractor for charge. So when you do this, it takes 2 to 4 sessions a week for 5 to 10 weeks. On the day that the alcohol or drug addict learns to replace the missing frequency, often alpha, euphoric eidetic, on that day, his next drink of beer will make him feel sick because the body now rejects what had been functioning as a substitute for bliss. Okay? So this is an idea of how we turn the concept that addiction was not a mistake by God. The little boy riding a roller coaster gets off, and his eyes are wider than they've ever been before. Says, "Mom, I want to do that again." Right? That's not addiction. That's biology saying, "I need charge density." Right? Are the people here familiar with the geometry of eternality? So that if you want to look at how to die, and you went to the literature, it's well documented, that when you die, you lose 4 to 8 ounces of weight, right? And where does that weight go? It goes through the center of a pineapple, pine cone, pineal. Thanks to Alex Gray for this. And so at the moment of death, what happens if you actually, it's called taking your memories into the inner world requires a simple map based on superposed spins. And in this project called the Cartography of Consciousness, Heinrich Kluwe went to hundreds of near-death experiencers and asked them, what did you see? Because I would like a map of what I'm going to see when I die so I can steer. And so they drew a map. First I saw a lattice, then I saw a cobweb, then I saw a tunnel, then I saw a spiral. In answer to your question, the universe is continually trying to come to a point. Have you made your point yet? Yeah? Very pointed remark. So here is a lattice, a cobweb, a tunnel, a spiral. You take a vortex array, and you can make a lattice, a cube. You nest the cube in the dodeca, you have a cobweb. You ratchet the cobweb down a helix, you have a slinky, a tunnel. You bring the tunnel to a big point, and then you have a spiral. And then you can nest that donut, and you go round and around. And each time, all you're doing is adding an axis of spin symmetry. And that's called going to the next dimension. And it's literally a map of how to die. By creating a center point in the next smaller geometry, you create a symmetry with respect to the next bigger axis. So the point is, the idea here is that this ability to make a still point in the field effect you're in enables you to reach the next biggest field effect. And I think we'll probably end with this little animation of the origin of the Holy Grail here then. So you remember that in the heart work, we came to the point where we realized that the EKG was creating a harmonic cascade here, spin path to the 0 point. And if you map the electrical origin of the heart's beat, you see you see a 7-colored donut, and you see the wave turning inside out recursively. So now we can go to the 3D animation and correct the relative size of the magnetic domains which are causing your heart to fire. And if we just animate that, we see the place where the donuts cross here is the top of the concentric interdigitated nested dodecahedron as per this model. And so if I look at the top-down view of that, I'm seeing the spin path down into those dodeca ecosa, which is 10 spirals of the golden mean, top-down view of DNA, Earth grid, and zodiac. And if I rotate 32-degree tilt, chin angle of the sphinx, cube in the dodeca, hex from pent, and now I have the side view of that light cone. So there's an infinite number of these dodeca ecosa in that symmetry, and that each time these two waves cross, they add and multiply their wavelength and velocity. And so what happens is the velocity creates an acceleration. Remember, these 10 spirals are on a cone, right? You see the cone there? It's a 60-degree light cone of implosion. It's the angle of the best capacitor for weather engineering. And if I take that spiral on the cone, which is called the caduceus, spin path to the 0 point we've been talking about all night, and just revolve it, as you've seen, from the side view to the top view, I get the Holy Grail. It's a cup within a cup that has no inside or outside. It solves the problem of separateness. It contains the serpent, the spiral, the Sufi heart with wings, the perfect Valentine, the feminine reproductive organs. And you can zoom in forever and always see the same thing, yeah? And it's a three-dimensional fractal because I could take that spiral and revolve it. Notice you think you're outside, then you're inside out, yes? And that's the swastika, which was merely a spin path map, right? A compression map. So this is a three-dimensional fractal because I could zoom in forever from any angle of approach as long as I was focused on center and always recursively see the same thing. So this is what happens to DNA in the presence of love. You get this compression algorithm where the map becomes the terrain, yes? And that's when Arthur and the land are one.